So before we start learning today Parshas Chukas, today's sheet is dedicated Leilui Nishmas Moras Rochel Leah Basab Chaim Osher HaKohen, the mother of our dear friend, to me a personal friend for many, many years, and a friend of Minchas Osher, Reb Chaim Orlinsky from Teaneck, New Jersey. And I knew his mother very well. She and Chaim's late father were survivors, Mesirus Nefesh people with unbelievable koiches nefesh and siyata d'shmaya, raised a beautiful family. Bonim uvnei boinam oiskim b'toiro v'mitzvahs. So Moras Rochalei b'Reb Chaim Osher HaKohen should be a melitzas yosher for the entire family. Shetenuach b'sholom al mishkova, and we should all hear B'Seres Tovis. And the Torah we learn today is dedicated Leilui Nishmoso. This week's parsha, one of the fundamental sugyas is Tumas Meis. Zois Torah Odom Kiyomes Be'ol Kol HaBoel U'Oel V'Kol HaShaboel Yitmu Shivas Yomim. So today, as always, we start with the fundamentals, with the definitions, with the Agdoras, and we will move on to some fascinating halacha l'maisa questions and analysis. So the nature of this shir is not to paskan halacha l'maisa, and I make this clear once and again and again and again. However, we will speak about halachic principles, even though it is not halachic ruling. Tumas meis, the only tumah that is defined as avi avois hatuma, is a deceased person, a dead person. Tmei meis, which means the person that touched the body of the deceased, or he was in an oihel, in the same room as the deceased, he is an av hatuma. And then from one to the other, the level of tuma goes down. Avi avois to av to rishon, rishon to sheni. And that is the nature of exposure to tuma in any level. So before we go into halachic questions, the Rambam counts Tumas Meis as one of the Taryag Mitzvah Shebetoira, and that is Mitzvah Sasei Kuf Zayin. Sefer HaChinuch, as always, follows in the footsteps of the Rambam, and in Mitzvah Shin Tzadik Ches, Sefer HaChinuch also counts Tumas Meis as one of the mitzvahs. It is not a mitzvah to expose yourself to a mace. It is a din, the din of Tamei Meis. The Rambam counts as a separate mitzvah, the mitzvah of Kroivim, Kvoida Meis. He counts as separate mitzvah, the instead of a Cohen to expose himself to Tumas Meis. But the actual din of Tumas Meis is one of the Taryag, but that is only the opinion of the Rambam. The Ramban disagrees. The Ramban and mitzvah say Tzadik Vov. And there's a fundamental machlokes between Ramban and Rambam that doesn't really deal with the essence of Tumas Meis, but rather with the essence of the magical number Taryag. Chazal only once in the entirety of Shas share with us that there are Taryag mitzvahs, and that's the Gemara at the end of Masechet Makos. So what's included in this magical number Taryag? The Rambam says not only mitzvahs that we define as precepts, but also dinim. One of the Taryag, according to the Rambam, is mekach umemkar, transactions. We do not have a mitzvah to buy, nor do we have a mitzvah to sell anything, whether it's property, real estate, chattel, animals, cars. No mitzvah to sell, no mitzvah to buy, but the mitzvah is if you do sell or do buy, and any transaction you do should be al pi ha'Torah, al pi ha'halacha. The same regarding dinei tumah v'tahara, according to the Rambam. It's not a mitzvah to say, nor is it a lo ta'aseh, but it's a din. And dinim are part of the Taryag, and this is a principle to which the Ramban disagrees. Now, the context of Tumas Meis in our parsha is the context of Bias Migdash. Zois Torah Odom ki yomus ba'oil. And the Torah describes how a person is oilem etumah tahara. And then the Posuk says, Ve'isha sheyitma v'lo yeschato v'nichrasu ha'nefeshu metoch hakol ki es migdash Hashem timei. So a person that comes into the Beis HaMikdash before he is purified from Tumas Meis, chayav koros. And the Rambam says that is only Tumas Maga, Tumas Oil, that are clearly defined explicitly in Torah's Moshe. Cherev areu kecholol is a din, and we won't discuss this din, it's very complicated. But this is a din which is not mefurish b'Torah. The Torah says halal cherev. Pshuto shel mikro. What does halal cherev mean? It means that a person has tumas meis whether he died a natural death or he was murdered, killed by another. And that is what the Torah's pashtus means, halal cherev. But Chazal learned cherev areu kecholol. A sword has a din of the mace. So a sword that touches the deceased is avi avois hatuma, like a mace ba'atzmai. And there are three opinions in the Rishonim. What does cherev mean? According to the Rash in Masechet Oris, it is only the sword by which a person was killed. He was murdered by a knife, by a sword. Rabbeinu Tam says every kli matches. The Rambam says every kli, regardless of what material it is made. But the Kesef Mishnah explains the opinion of the Rambam, and that is Perek Hei, Halacha Hei, Ilchos Tumas Meis, that there is no chorus in Bias Migdash only by Maga and oil that are mafurish b'Torah. Even though Cherev Arei Kechol is man Torah. Merkeves HaMishnah wants to prove from the Rambam that the din of Cherev Arei Kechol is only midrabanan, and that is why there is no chorus. Kesef Mishnah is right and not Merkeves HaMishnah, because in Perek Gimel Halacha Zayin Bias Migdash is mafurish and Rambam that it is man Torah. And this is one of the sources, as I made clear in Minchas Osher. Chumash Bereishis, I don't remember which siman, and I constantly apologize. But there's a lengthy siman somewhere in the middle of Minchas Osher Bereishis, in which I prove from many sources a novel chiddush of the Rambam. And I'm surprised that none of the Achronim expands this chiddush. The Rambam maintains in many sources there is Ikar HaMitzvah v'dvorim aklulim b'mitzvah. And sometimes the oynish is only applicable to the Ikar HaMitzvah, and the same in our sugya. Maga and oil are explicitly mafurish in Torah, and Koras and Bias Migdash refers only to those halachas. Cherev Arei Kechol is a din d'oraisa, but it's not mafurish b'Torah, and therefore there is no Koras by Bias Migdash. So whatever I said up to this point is just a brief introduction of the fundamentals. And now I want to share with you halachic principles, which are extremely important and relevant, because many times shilas come to me. A person is scheduled to have surgery in a hospital, elective surgery. Usually life-saving surgery is not planned out in ahead. These are usually emergency procedures. But a person is scheduled for elective surgery, and he needs that surgery. 1,000 different things. So he's not going to die tomorrow if he pushes off the operation, but till he'll get another opening, it might take months. And he's in suffering, and he's in pain. And he arrives at the hospital, Azora lekoyanim. So many hospitals in Eretz Yisrael, and tumas oil is more common in Eretz Yisrael than in many places in America, because a non-Jew is not matama ba'oil, only a Jewish person. Yavomis Samach Beis, Kivrei Yakum, Eina Metamam Ba'oil, only B'maga. But even in New York, in a major hospital, there are always Jewish people, and always Jewish people after their demise. So there's a Zorah Kohen, he's a Kohen. He can't come into the hospital. If we wait a half hour, he's going to lose his opening, and we need to wait months till he's going to get another opportunity. Could he come into the hospital even though he knows that he's exposing himself to tumas meis, and it's a isa mediurais ala kohen to expose yourself to tumas meis? That is the more drastic question, and sometimes it's not really as acute, but still very important. Bikur choilem. So it's just visiting a friend, nicht gefährlich. You're going to wait. You're going to take another opportunity, but sometimes your parent is waiting for you, or your spouse. A husband came to visit his wife, or a wife to a husband, and the husband is going into surgery, or his wife is going to surgery in an hour, and she desperately wants to see me. I want to wish her hatzlacha and daven for her and calm her. Yeah, I'm waiting. I'm outside in the waiting room. I'm here. I'm not far away. So could he go in even though there's a Zorah Lekoyanim? And let me share with you the principles that permit or enable leniency. Shetas haravid, and the Ravid appears twice. Naziris Pereke Tezvav, and Elchas Aval Peregimel Alocha Zayin. The Ravid Shitta is, if a person is a Tmei Meis anyway, there is no Isser exposing himself once again to the same Tumah. He's Tamei anyway. Shechanoch doesn't paskin in accordance to the Ravid. Let me make this very clear. Sheinayin Gimel Siv Zayin. But that's the opinion of the Ravid. B'shasat Chak, Simareish Membeis, and Kroli Apsik of the Shach, we learn Shasat Chak Samchinan al Das Yochid. And whenever I teach these halachos to my Talmidim, I say we need to define what is Shasat Chak. And I think it needs to be something extreme. But the situations I described are extreme. Number one, extremely extreme. Number two, maybe mildly extreme. But I definitely think that both would be defined as Shas Chak. Is that Avad Das Yochid? I don't think so. Contrary to the Mishnah LaMelech, and the Mishnah LaMelech considers the Avad to be a Das Yochid and as Mishnah LaMelech and Elchos Naziris. Same Rebbe Kiva Eger. Chuvs Rebbe Kiva Eger Tinyon Simen Yud Ches. But there's some Soifi Yordei Shulam Tes, Shin Lam Tes already wonders on the Mishnah Melech. The Avad is not a Das Yochid at all. The Rosh, Halochas Ketalas Ilchas Tumah, Siman Vav, the Rosh brings that Rabbeinu Tam is the same as the Avad. Avnei Nezet Tov Samach Vav quotes the Smag. And it actually is in the Smag, Reish Lamed Aleph. Smag, Rosh B'Shem Rabbeinu Tam. And Rabbeinu Tam was Rosh V'Rishon L'Rabbeinu Arishonim. Lechem Mishnah Hilchos Naziris proves the same from Rashi. Nozia Mem Beis Omud Beis. So we have Rashi Rabbeinu Tam, Ravid, and Smag. Goes against the Rambam, against the Beis Yosef and Shulchan Aruch, but still, this is an important shitta. There is a difference between Rabbeinu Tam and the Ravid. The Ravid says once a person is Tmei Meis, there is no more Issa exposing himself once again to another Meis. Rabbeinu Tam says that is only the same day, because the Tmei Meis is Oila Metumah Tahar in 7 days, and he needs Hazoah, Poraduma, Gimel V'Zayin. So according to Rabbeinu Tam, if you're on the second day of your count, and once again, you expose yourself, and that'll be on the same day. Which means only the same day that you touch the mace, or you were ba'oil a mace, if you expose yourself once again, that is not an issur. But if it's a day later, it is an issur, because you are postponing the process of tahara with a day. However, some of the achronim, Shoel HaMeshiv, Madura Aleph, Chelak Aleph, Shin Vav, Avnei Nezeh that I quoted. But the very first to say this Chiddush is the Shiltei Geborim, Hilchos Tumah in Rif. Shiltei Geborim says that the difference between the same day or a day after is only relevant Bizman HaBayis when they had Efer Porah. But in our times, a Tmei Meis is a Tmei Meis forever. And there is no way in which he could be Oilem and Tumah because we don't have a Porah Duma. And therefore, there no longer is any difference whether it's the same day or a day later, or a week later, or a month later. Because he's Tumah forever anyway. So once again, Ravid Rabbeinu Tam, Rashi, Smag, that's not a Das Yochid at all. Yes, Shulchan Aruch doesn't paskin in accordance, but still, if it's a Shas Chak, at least this gives us some room for leniency. It's a suffix. And maybe we could develop a Svek Sveika. Dogon Mervava Shianayin Beis comes with a Gavaldige Chiddush and a Gavaldige Chumra, and he says, even according to the Ravid, it's an Issa D'Oraisa. Aimbo Malchus, but it's a Issa D'Oraisa. And therefore, in the beginning, the Noida Biudu wants to be Mitzaraf Shittas Ravid to create a Svek Sveika, and he backtracks, he backs down. Fascinating tshuva in Chasam Sofer, Shin Lamed Vav. Chasam Sofer tells a story I was together with my great Rebbe, Reb Nosson Adler, and we were in Prague, and we went to visit in the Noida B'Yehuda, and in the conversation that developed, Reb Nosson Adler convinced the Noida B'Yehuda that even according to the rabbis, it's an Isser Diuraisa. However, that is a gewaltige Chiddush, and it goes against the understanding of the Mishnah Melech and the Bekiva Eiga. So the Mishnah Melech and the Bekiva Eiga maintain that Ein halacha kedivrei Ravid is a das yochid. But in the opinion of the Ravid, it was clear to them that it's mutar even lachatchela. Vekach mashma medivrei Rishonim, Harosh, Haravid, Hasmag, lo kedivrei Hanoida B'Yehuda. Now, the minig is to bury Koyanim in the very first row. And why is that? The family should be able to visit the Kvorim. But in Shin Ayin Gimel and Shulchan Aruch, Siv Zayin, the reasoning is a different one. Koyanim have a mitzvah to bury their next of kin. Children, brothers, sisters, parents. And they have a mitzvah to expose themselves to Tumah. But only to the bodies of their relatives, not to anyone else. And that is why the Shulchan Aruch says they can't go into a cemetery to approach the Mukom HaKeva, because as they walk into a cemetery, they're exposing themselves to Tumah from right and left, from before and from behind. There's Tumah everywhere. They're next to Kvorim. And therefore, the minig is to bury the first row. Shulchan Gevoya, one of the most important commentaries in Shulchan Aruch, writes that minig Yerushalayim Kushta Vesaloniki. That means Turkey, Greece, and Yerushalayim. Even Kahanim are buried in the midst of the basic forest because the relatives have a mitzvah to expose themselves and take care of Kvoid HaMeis, even if they expose themselves to additional tumas from other Mesim. And this minig is clearly based on Shittas HaRavid. So it's not something totally out of the blue. Minig Yerushalayim was to rely on Shittas HaRavid. That's number one. Number two. Shach Shin Ayin Beis Siv Kotten Beis. Shach writes, there are two concepts which make it problematic for a Kohen to go into a modern day hospital. There aren't Mesim everywhere, not on every floor, not in every machlaka. However, Tumah flies in a split second from one room to the other, from one floor to the other, from the 30 stories in a split second in no time, in the speed of light. But the Shach maintains that the entire concept that Tumah Oiveres Mecheder Lacheder, is a window or a door between them, is only Tumah Derabonon. Tumah Soil Diurais is only in the very same room where the body is. Another concept in halacha, even if the door is closed, Soif Tumah Letzeis, it is as if the Tumah breaks through doors, an invisible power. Soif Tumah Letzeis, as if there is no door. Both these halachas, according to the Shach, are midrabanan. Mogen Avraham disagrees with the Shach. Orach Chaim Siman Shiur Yud Aleph. For most of the Achronim follow in the footsteps of the Mogen Avraham. Chochmas Adam Kuf Nun Tes Tshuvas Chasam Sofer Shin Mem Pischei Tshuvas Siv Koten Gimel. But primarily the Mogen Avraham disagrees with the Shach on halacha number 1, not necessarily on number 2. When the Shach says, when Tumah is over mebayis labayis alidei perseach tefach, that is min Torah according to Mogen Avraham. But Soif Tumah Letzeis, many Achronim agree with the Shach. Pnei Yehoshua and Brochas Yutes agrees with the Shach totally on both halachas. And he writes, I wrote a big contrast, and I brought many rayas and justified the opinion of the Shach. We don't have that contrast. Maybe we do. After the Pnei Yehoshua passed away, the Nachal Eshkol was his successor, and he was the Rav in Frankfurt the Main. Nachal Eshkol is a commentary on Sefer Eshkol. The Nachal Eshkol was a Cohen and a tzaddik. He wasn't aware that the manuscript of Sefer Eshkol is questionable. It's questionable whether it is authentic. He definitely thought it's authentic. So this is a paradox. The Nachal Eshkol is a more important Sefer than the Eshkol. And the Nachal Eshkol in Sefer Chastoma quotes a tshuva of the Pnei Yeshua. Is that the very same tshuva that the Pnei Yeshua refers to? Maybe. Not likely. Because the Pnei Yeshua writes, I wrote a kuntres. And that's not a very lengthy tshuva. But the Nachal Eshkol brings the tshuva and he writes, this is the Pnei Yeshua's tshuva. And both the Pnei Yeshua and the Nachal Eshkol agree with the Shach. Shiur agrees with the Shach. Simakuf Tezvov. Rabbi Yankov Emden Shilas Yavetz Chelik Beis Kuf Ayin Ches. Yeshua's Yankov Yoredei Shinayin Gimel. So many Achroinim agree with the Shach. That even Thomas She'oiver Mecheder L'Cheder is only Midrabanon. The big problem with the Shach is it's against the Rambam. Just one moment. Rambam Hilchas Sover Perek Gimel Alochi Gimel. The Rambam writes, when Tumah goes from one room to the other, Loike, Cohen, Loike. And if the Rambam writes as Malchus, obviously it's a Dioraisa and not a Derabonon. Perek Gimel Halacha Gimel. So even if we assume that the Rambam contradicts the Pnei Yeshua, but still, if Rashi is in accordance to the Pnei Yehoshua, and Pnei Yeshua argues that Rashi supports the Shach, Tshuvas Atashbetz, Chelik Gimel Siman Aleph, maybe the Alochas Keshach, even if it's against the Rambam. I just want to quote two sources. And it goes against conventional thinking in the yeshiva world. But who is more musmach to define the Rambam than a Maggid Mishnah Kesef Mishnah Mari Kurkus? There is no Kalim. Kesef Mishnah. Hilchas Gerishin Perek Yud Aleph Aloch Yud Alad writes, sometimes the Rambam writes Loika, and he means Makas Mardas, the Rabbonan, not necessarily a Dioraisa. We find the same in Mahari Kukos, Hilchas Klein Perek Tes Aloch Avav. And the Kesef Mishnah Hilchas Gerishin, he understands the Maggid Mishnah according to this principle. So Im Kain, there is no necessity to make a machlokes between the Rambam and the Shach. I just want to quote Sholem Eshiv Madura Gimel Chele Gimel Simachov Marasha Engel Chele Gimel Chov Zayin are mitzar of the Shach to a Svek. And I quoted before, many Achroinim maintain Ikar Halacha Divrei Shach. So if we're dealing with the Rabbanon, and it's a Sveike Rabbanon because of Shittas Haravid, we already have quite some room for leniency. Sofek Tumah B'Shus Arabim. Is it a Sofek Tumah or a Tumah Vadai? I think it's always a Sofek Tumah. Even when the sign says Azora LaKoyanim. Maybe the Cohen was already taken out of the building and not always are they aware in immediacy to change the sign. I know at least in Sharet Tzedek they do not differentiate between Jew or non-Jew because that might be defined as discrimination. And sometimes how would a nurse know if somebody is Jewish or not? Not always is the name a clear indicator. And we treat all the patients with the same care and same compassion and same treatment. So once a person dies, there's a Zorah LaKoyanim, but he might be a non-Jew, which is not Mitame Ba'oyal. And therefore, I think in a hospital it's always Sofek Tumah B'Shus Arabim. Sofek Tumah B'Shus Arabim Svekei Tohar. So the Minchas Chinuch Eish Samech Gimel is Mesupik. Maybe Svekei Tohar regarding the halachas of Tumah V'Tahara, but regarding the question of Tumas Koyanim, that would be a Svekei D'Yesura, Svekei D'Oraisa L'Chumra. That's a Sofek of the Minchas Chinuch Eish Samech Gimel. The two Gedolim of Lithuania, of Lita, of Vilna before the war with Achiez and the Marcheshes, Reb Chaim Moshe Grudzinski and Reb Chornoch Heinech Eigish. They were two precious friends and the two Gedolim of Vilna, and both are Machmir. Achiez Chelik Gimel Samachei, Marcheshes Chelik Aleph Simen Beis, and to me it's a Chiddush. Because in the Rishonim it is clear that Sofek Tumah B'Shus Arabim Torah, even regarding Tumas Koyanim. Toises Ksubas Chov Chesom Beis, regarding Beis Apras, which is a Sofek Tumah B'Shus Arabim, Rash Perek Aleph of Ohalois. So these are the Rishonim. Many mistakenly quote this chumrah in the name of the tzlach, and they didn't properly understand the tzlach. The tzlach is in Brochas Yud Testament base. So the Gemara says, "Medal gonoyinu al gabi kvorim lirois malchi yisrael v'ror malchi yisrael elu afel malchi omes olam shemi yiski yavchen." What's that for koyanim to go on a base of kvoros? Rav kvorim yesh ben pesach tefach. So the tzlach asks, why do we need a rav? Even it would be a suffix, machatzal, machzah, suffix a shochel, suffix to mishuzam toyer. The tzlach answers. Tosfos explains that a kever is metama, whether there is a pesach tefach or not. That's tumas goylel, tumas doifek. But maybe a kohen doesn't have an issa to expose himself to tumas goylel, only to tumas meis, not to the tum of a kever. So the tzlach says, this is not a suffix tuma, because it's vadei tuma. The question whether a kohen is prohibited to expose himself to tumas goylel, that is a sveika di isura. That's not a suffix tuma. So lehefach, we could learn from the Taz, from the tzlach. If it would be a suffix tuma, it would be mutar lekoyanim, but it's not a suffix tuma because it's a tuma vadai and a suffix is. And therefore, I do not think we need to be choishish, and that's contrary to the Avi Ezri Maduret Lisoa, Helches Mochais, and to Tshuvas Mechashloim Achelik Beisim and Kuf. And this brings us to the last part of today's Shiur. Is there room for leniency because it's a Dvar Mitzvah? Bekechoylem Kibud Av, Refuah, Avodah Zorah Yud Gimel. And it's clear in the Rambam, Hilchas Ovel, Shulchan Aruch Shinayim Beis Yif Aleph. Lilmet Torah B'Lisu Isha, the Kohen could expose himself to Tumas Eretz U'amim or Beis HaPras, Tumah Derabanan. Would that refer to every Tumah Derabanan and every mitzvah? Tosfos brings the shel to every mitzvah. Tosfos has only these two great mitzvahs, Pru'ervu and Talmud Torah. Rambam clearly indicates every mitzvah. The Rambam writes, Mutar b'tumah derabanan lemitzvah kigan lesu isha v'lelmet Torah. Those are just examples. Would it be relevant to every tumah derabanan, or maybe only based on pras and eretz u'amim? Fascinating tshuva in Chavis Yor. So the Chavis Yor, Kuf Tezvav, says there was a story. People were davening in a shul, and there was a window from the shul to an apartment to a house, and in the house, the neighboring house, there was a dead person. A person passed away, and all the kohanim left the shul. And the Chavis Yor is moicha, they should not have left the shul. According to the Shach, from one room to the other is only Tumah Derabanan, and why be mevatla mitzvah saseh birchas kohanim for a Tumah Derabanan? What we learn from the Chavis Yor is two principles. He relies on the Shach, halocha lamaisa. And it is not only Lilmet Torah v'Lisu Isha, who adin nesiyas kapayim. According to the Yerushalmi, even Tumah Diuraisa is mutar for a Dvar Mitzvah. And the Yerushalmi appears in four different sources. Brochas Chav Gimel Amid Aleph, Nozi Lamed Gimel Amid Beis, Klayim Daf Mem, Bov Metzia Daf Tet. And it's really a pillar. How could we matir an Issa Diuraisa for a mitzvah? The Rashba seems to indicate that because it's a lav she'enoi shova b'koil, it's still a chiddush. But on Bavli it is clearly only Tumah Derabanan, like Beis HaPras and Tumas Eretz U'amim. Chavis Yor says, Hu adin shittas hashach mecheda lecheda. So let's just summarize everything we spoke about. If we're dealing with a real Shas Adchak, there might be room for leniency. Based on Shittas HaRavid, which is not only the Ravid, Rashi, Rabbeinu Tam, Smag, and according to many Achronim, actually most Achronim, even Achatchil, according to this opinion, it's Muta. Ein alocha ki Shitta zu, but b'Shas Adchak we could at least be Metzar of this Shitta, and especially if it's a Sveika Derabanan based on the Shach. So it's a Sveika Derabanan leDvar Mitzvah. And therefore, yes, mokem lahokal, if it's a real shas adchak, especially sofek tume b'shus harabim, which min ha-Torah at least is sveikoi muta. And therefore, if a person is afraid he's going to lose his appointment and he needs to wait months till he'll be able once again to have a separation, I think then one does not need to wait.